Hey guys, my name is Emma and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a video that I've been promising you for a little while, and it's going to be my take on Daisy Jones and the Six and how it compares to The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. For those of you who have managed to somehow miss this in the Booktube community, basically The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is the very well received book by the author Taylor Jenkins Reid. This came out last year and was essentially a firm favourite from word go. Now her hotly anticipated next book, Daisy Jones and the Six, not related to the other one, came out back in February to essentially wide critical acclaim. Pretty much everybody and their mother is reading this on Booktube at the moment and is absolutely loving it. Now I listened to this back in February and was distinctly underwhelmed, and what I want to do today is talk about the reasons why I didn't like Daisy Jones and the Six and why I really like Evelyn Hugo and what I think this one is missing that this one does so well, and just kind of do a bit of a biopic comparison of the two Taylor Jenkins Reid books that I have read, because this was a 5-star read for me and was one of my favourites from last year. This was a 2-star and I would have DNF'd it if I'd been reading the physical book and not on audiobook form, and that's a fairly polarising stance on one author's work. So let's get into it, shall we? So a few quick disclaimers before I get started. First of all, I want to let you know that I listened to both of these books on audiobook form, and I would actually recommend kind of consuming both of them in this format. I think Taylor Jenkins Reid's work really works well in audiobook. Now Daisy Jones I listened to back in February, and Taylor Jenkins Reid was actually April last year, so it now has been a full 12 months since I read that book, and I've not reread it. I've only read both of them once, so some of my knowledge on Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo may be a little bit shaky in places. I've kind of quickly flipped through both books whilst making notes for this video now, but there's always going to be some gaps in my knowledge of sort of remembering exact details. Also, this video is going to go into spoilers. I'm talking about both books in full detail, so there's no way around it. I'm going to be spoiling things. Sorry if you're not into that kind of whole scene. Start watching now. Layers. So if you're still around, let's get into it. The first thing that I'm going to be doing is talking about a summary of each one of the plots. So The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo is a biopic look back at the character Evelyn Hugo and her 7 husbands. Evelyn Hugo in this particular world is a very famous actress from the golden age of Hollywood. She has been notoriously a recluse for most of her life and has never done any major interviews, or hasn't recently. A young journalist called Monique gets the opportunity to interview her, and then Evelyn turns around and says, "Hey, I want you to be the one who writes my biography. By the way, I'm dying." Fairly intense, and then it goes from there with Evelyn telling her story to Monique, and this is why the audiobook format works really well, because it is one person telling another human being in a very kind of interviewee style about their life. Throughout Evelyn's life she's had these 7 husbands for varying different reasons, and because of the time period that it's set in, I'm pretty sure it was the 1950s give or take, is when she kind of starts her career. It really is a look at sort of sexism and women's roles in society and how the film industry helped to change that. And Evelyn is also bisexual, and it also covers her relationship with her partner, either Celia or Cecilia, I can't quite remember which, and about the stigma that surrounds that, and then how she has had to cope with that being in the public eye. Daisy Jones and the Six again is told in an interview style, but this time it is interviewing all the members of the band, which are the Six and Daisy Jones herself, so 7 of them, plus a collection of characters who are around the various members of the band in their life, like producers, partners, friends, etc, etc. To begin with, we don't know who the interviewer is, and then it is kind of revealed later as a bit of a sort of a twist as such, that it is the daughter of Billy, who is the main kind of frontman for the band The Six. So Daisy Jones is your typical spoilt brat, rich heiress with their 2 very distant parents, who the whole thing's based in LA in the 70s, and she is trying to make it in the music career. The Six is a band which was formed by Billy and his brother Graham, and then other members kind of join, and basically Daisy Jones and the Six end up doing like a kind of collaboration, which is received so well that she ends up working on the full album with them, and it's what happens when you introduce that new person to the dynamic. The thing mainly focuses on Daisy and Billy and their kind of electric relationship which they have. They kind of go from hating each other to having this really intense emotional connection. Billy is married to Camila and has a child with her, and in fact has several children with her, and it's about basically everything going on behind the scenes. There's drug abuse, there's rehab, there's a whole lot of different stuff going on, and it kind of culminates in this big explosion where Daisy Jones and the Six end up separating when they're out on tour, and at this point nobody really knows why or what happened or how it all fell apart, and this is supposed to be a big biopic looking back and trying to look behind the scenes as to why that happened. So those are the two books in their sort of holes as such, and now I'm just going to talk about some of the similarities between them and what I think that they have do quite well together. So both of them are looking at the entertainment industry, one being film or one being the music industry, but both of them, the main characters, receive very, very high critical acclaim and fame, which means that their lives stop really being their own. They get thrown into the public eye, and a lot of the discussion in both books is about how they manage this and what counts as personal and what counts as private when you are such a famous human being, and the kind of things that go on behind the scenes and then the speculation that comes from that. So that was interesting in both books. Both of them biopic look back at a life. We are learning about this, but the characters already know what has happened, so rather than kind of going with the characters, everything that they do is a look back at their own lives with everything already happening, with hindsight, etc, etc, which kind of changes the narrative frame slightly as to how we approach how the storytelling has been done. Both have an element of the political in them. I think that Evelyn Hugo does it significantly better than Daisy Jones. I'm going to start referring to them just shortened down to literally the character names, because holy crap girl, Taylor Jenkins Reid, can we have slightly shorter titles so that it makes it easier to talk about these things? Thanks, girl. So when I say that, I am not referring specifically to the characters, I'm just referring to the entire books. So yeah, Evelyn Hugo does it definitely better when it comes to the political side of things, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Both of them do involve atonement in some way and some kind of sense of a wrongdoing or a wrongness, which then ends up being part of the big twist ending, and both of them do rely on this format of a big twist ending. The reason why I'm doing all this hand waving is because I didn't actually think that either of them pulled off the big twist ending particularly well, and that is pretty much the only criticism I have of Evelyn Hugo, is I didn't like the ending, whereas for me, Daisy Jones, it was kind of beyond saving by that point. And personally for me, both of them I experienced in audiobook form, and just from the general chatter that's going on Booktube, it seems like most people are going for audiobook, especially with Daisy Jones and the Six, and I have heard a few people say when they've spoken negatively about the book, it was people who were trying to read it, which with this interview format I can't imagine working very well. The audiobook is great for both of them. Let's talk about what I liked about Evelyn Hugo and what I felt was missing in Daisy Jones and why I didn't like this one as much. There really isn't enough room to hold both of these up. So Evelyn Hugo as a main female character is absolutely amazing. One of the strongest things I think about this book is the characterization. Evelyn Hugo is such a badass female who knows what she wants in life, knows what is important to her, and is not afraid to do whatever is necessary to protect what is her own and get where she wants to go. Evelyn Hugo is a straight up Slytherin bitch through and through, and I fucking love her for it. She is cutthroat, she is vicious, and she will do literally whatever it takes. And in some cases that involves covering up an accidental murder. Like, girl's got fucking balls of steel. She knows what she's after, and she's not willing to compromise unless that compromise ends up with her getting the result that she wanted in the first place, which isn't even a compromise. Like, do you know what I mean? She's not afraid to use her body and her sexuality and to really manipulate the situation that she's been put in to get ahead. Most of her marriages, in fact, technically, I guess all of her marriages are because it means that she's furthering herself and her goals. Honestly, I see a lot of Cersei Lannister in her if you ignore the incest side of things for Cersei, in that sense of like real ambition and knowing how to use people to get where she wants to go. And for that, I totally respect her as a character. I think she's really well-rounded and really interesting because of it. I think Evelyn Hugo as a book and as a story is generally more interesting too, because there is this secondary subplot going on. So in Daisy Jones and the Six, there doesn't really feel like there's any particular reason why the biopic would be happening now. It's just somebody sitting down and chatting with the band. Whereas Evelyn Hugo is the one who has decided to start doing this biography of herself and talking to this journalist, and big spoiler alert, I guess, the reason is because the person who the murder that she covers up, basically her and her husband at the time are driving and he's drunk and he hits somebody and kills them, and they basically cover everything up so that way it doesn't look like it, and it looks like it was the guy being drunk, or something happens that they basically cover up so it looked like it was an accident, and it turns out that it's Monique's father, and she just thought that her dad like ran away and was this total douchebag, and it turns out that it's all fine, and that Evelyn is the one who murdered him. So I guess it's not all fine. I might have got the finer points of exactly that particular twist at the end there wrong, because it's now been a year, but general gist is basically Evelyn Hugo was part of the murder of Monique's father. So there feels like, but because of that, it feels like there's this other thing going on behind it, which means that I think the story has a lot more drive and a lot more purpose to it, and kind of the pacing is a lot nicer. I kept finding in Daisy Jones, I was like, why do I care about what is happening right now? Like, are we going towards anything? Is it just that they're going to break up because they break up? Like, there didn't seem to be any real reason for it other than this framing narrative for the sake of it. I also thought that the secondary cast in Evelyn Hugo was significantly more interesting, and the relationships between the main character and the secondary cast were far better explained and explored. And I just felt so invested in every single character. The final thing that I really liked about Evelyn Hugo was that it was political in nature, and it really spoke strongly about things like sexuality and sexism and the rights of people, and it was talking about, you know, sort of representation within sexuality in the LGBTQ+YA. I slurred that completely, sorry guys, I'm talking way too quickly, I need to like chill. But like the representation of bisexuality, and there's a really brilliant discussion with Evelyn about how she sees herself and sees her own sexuality, because for her, men have always been something which she's attracted to, but when it comes to women, it's just Cecilia, and that's a really interesting discussion, and it just generally does a lot more when it comes to things that are interesting to talk about. So we get a lot of discussion about women's representations in media going back through the decades, and there's just generally a lot more meat to it. In comparison, when we then look at now Daisy Jones and the Six, we're going to see exactly why I think this one fails and why it doesn't have anywhere near as much of a bite and grab as Evelyn Hugo. So on the surface, Daisy Jones and the Six could have been just as powerful as Evelyn Hugo, but I feel like Taylor Jenkins Reid just missed the mark on this one. Firstly, there isn't really a main character. There's far too many people who need to be the main players that we don't really get invested in any of them. We spent ages with Daisy and Billy, and honestly they are the most irritating people ever. I hate creatives, I'm sorry. Like, as somebody who considers herself relatively creative anyway, I can't stand people getting really arty about like, oh, the craft and we shouldn't change this, and like getting precious about things. And I find that as a narrative really boring, because you're just annoying and pretentious. Personally, like the whole discussion about Daisy and her like, I'm not gonna compromise myself for this record deal. Well, just then you're not going to get a record deal, love. Like, I'm sorry, this is the real world. We can't all do what we want to do. At some point, you're going to have to compromise and get some fucking work out there, aren't you? Build a name for yourself, then you can throw your toys out your pram, love. And this was my big problem. Evelyn Hugo was such a strong, incredible character. Daisy Jones just fell flat. Daisy Jones was a spoilt brat with a coke problem who really needed to chill the fuck out, and for somebody to tell her, honey, go to rehab and stop spending so much fucking money. We get it, your parents didn't love you or hug you enough. Hug yourself. Like, I was just so over her before it even started. Then we have Billy. Now Billy is pretty much just as bad. Billy, before we even get the ball rolling, has got a drug problem and cheats on his wife, who is pregnant with his first child. And she's like, I can't tell if I like Camila or not as a woman. Camila was strong and ballsy and interesting, but also just let Billy do a lot of shit that I didn't agree with. And it was kind of framed and couched in this term of like, my family's more important and I will constantly pull him on the right track and I'm going to stand by my man no matter what. But also, I feel like the girl just put up with way too much shit, and I honestly don't understand why, because as far as I'm concerned, Billy's not worth it, man. Like, get yourself a nice bloke who isn't such a douchebag. So there was all that shit going on over there. But then we had all these other characters, because when it's called Daisy Jones and the Six, and there are 6 people in that band and Daisy Jones as well, you've essentially kind of got 7 main characters vying for space there. 3 of the band members might as well have not existed. They were just like cookie cutter, cut and paste, insert generic band member here. They were so boring and so dull and so like tropey, it was ridiculous. And the ones who I really, like, I wanted to know more about Karen and Graham's relationship. I wanted to know more about so many of the side characters. There was this whole relationship between Billy and a guy called Teddy, who is like either their producer or something like that. And then Teddy dies at one point and it's all really emotional and choked up. But we never really got to see Billy and Teddy's relationship. We got to hear other people talk about Billy and Teddy's relationship, but we never actually got to see it. So I didn't really care that Teddy was dead, because, oh, Teddy was the only man who was ever a father figure to Billy. Cool, but I didn't feel that. I didn't see that. I just heard you tell me that like 12 fucking times. I actually want to see it. Show me that they care about each other. Don't just be like, Billy and Teddy are really tight, man. Like, What does that even mean? Come on. Also, one thing that was really could have been cool and could have been a nice dynamic, but definitely just failed, was, so this is an interview setting with a bunch of people looking back on their past, and so the interview at the beginning is like, some of these things don't match up and it's because people's memories are bad. Cool, okay, awesome. Like, people misremembering things and like miscommunication, that can be used effectively, but it was on like every other page. It felt like they were misremembering even little details, and it just felt like it was such a forced point, so that way when we had this discussion of like what went down with Billy and Daisy and what even happened there and the fact that they don't match up, like, you've over labored that point. You were gonna do something cute and interesting with that, and instead now it's just a constant reminder, because every other page was like, oh, Billy was wearing a red t-shirt, Billy was wearing a white t-shirt, Billy was wearing his classic denim jacket. Shut the fuck up. Like, I get it. People are inconsistent. Human memory sucks. Our brains are really weird. Like, just me? Just me? Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just shouting into the void right now because everybody else seems to love this book, and I hated it. I really didn't get on with it, and if it weren't for the fact that it was an audiobook and the full cast of audiobook is incredible, I would have DNF'd it on like page 7. Also, another thing that annoyed me about this book, because we haven't gone into enough detail, is I felt like there was no point to it at all, because it was just like, I'm not one for looking at people's relationships, and it basically was just like a will they won't they between Daisy and Billy, and if so, will Billy leave his wife for Daisy, and of course he's fucking not going to, so it's still a bit of a moot point. But there were so many throwaway comments that could have been interesting, that I wanted to know about, that I wanted Taylor Jenkins Reid to explore like she had done in Evelyn Hugo, and she just let them pass her by. So like, there was a really interesting dynamic between Karen and Daisy, because Daisy was the kind of character who owned her sexuality, owned her body, knew that she was smoking hot and wasn't afraid to use it, and was really interested in being like, getting in your face and going, I don't give a shit that my tits are out, deal with it. Whereas Karen was coming from the stance of like, I have fought tooth and nail to be respected as a legitimate musician in this industry that shits on women, and I'm not going to use my body to get ahead because I want you to take me seriously and not just be a pair of tits. And that two like views on how women should use their bodies and how women should either play the game or not, and how you get ahead in situations, could have been so interesting, and I just wanted them to talk about it more and to look at that more, and they didn't. And again, another thing, it was a really throwaway comment by, there was like a character, Simone, who was like a mate of Daisy's, who kept getting interviewed, and she mentions in sort of the very end of it, she talks about her daughter, who is also singing, and is singing, like, also has a music career, and is singing very openly about drugs and drug use, and she makes this flippant comment about like, oh, she's not hiding it under the rug like we had to. And that again could have been a really interesting discussion to look at like this overwhelming pervasive drug use in 70s music that wasn't really talked about in the music, and everybody uses all of these like synonyms and metaphors and analogies when everybody knows that you're just off your face on coke right now. And that was something which could have been an interesting discussion about substance and substance abuse and substance use, and should we care, and how do we care, and why do we care, and like, there just could have been something there. But instead Billy just fucks off to rehab and then comes back, and Daisy's just a cokehead constantly, and then we get a tiny bit at the side at the end, and I just wanted more. I wanted so much fucking more from this book. I've like annoyed myself now. That's it. I don't really know how to end this video now. Basically, those are my feelings on Daisy Jones and why I felt so let down by that book, because I enjoyed Evelyn Hugo so much and thought it was so strong, and it just showed that like Taylor Jenkins Reid can do that kind of thing really well, and I find it definitely more frustrating when I like an author's work and then I don't like the other stuff that I read of them, especially if it's one that comes after the one that I read, because if you don't like their earlier work, then sometimes you can be like, well, they were learning their craft and they were getting better and improving. But when it's something that comes afterwards, you're like, no honey, you can do better, so why don't you do better? And I know that I'm totally in a minority about this on Booktube, but I wanted to share my opinions on Daisy Jenkins Reid and just try and give a different view. Obviously, if you like this book, cool man, like totally cool. If you didn't like Evelyn Hugo, cool, like totally cool. I've not heard anybody really talk negatively about that book, and that would be really interesting. I'd love to know your hot take on Evelyn Hugo. So yeah, I don't think I have any more to say about either of these books particularly. Obviously, I don't mean to offend anybody with this video, etc, etc. Standard disclaimer when talking about books negatively, whatever. And yeah, I will see you guys in my next video. Have a wonderful reading week, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye!